You know, for me, like if I rap something, like it needs to feel authentic. I either need to be spitting something that's true to my life or telling a story to try to like, you know, lift up other people whose voices I think need to be heard.
This is Champagne is Also a Band podcast. One songwriter, one song. I'm Sven, your host for a journey into the music of Champaign-Urbana. Recorded in the Blue Box studio with a songwriter from the Champaign-Urbana music scene, past or present. Champagne is Also a Band podcast is proud to be a part of the Champagne Showers Podcast Network. Welcome to Champagne is Also a Band podcast. Today, I'm talking with Pete, Afro D, Shungu, and you may know Pete from such bands as Nuclei, Afro D All-Stars, The Eclectic Collective, and Soul Movement. He also produces hip-hop beats under the name DJ Wemby, but be sure to catch him under his current band, Afro D and the Global Soundwaves. So Pete, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
So today we're going to be listening to your song, and forgive me, Superpouvoir, which will be released as a single or as a larger project, or we don't know yet.
That TBD, that's a great question. This is the first time that the public is hearing this song. And yeah, I'm hoping to put out a larger project in the not too distant future, but we may just release this as a single as well. So
without further ado, let's listen to the song.
This is for everyone out there who speaks more than one language. C'est pour tout le monde qui parle plusieurs langues. Being multilingual is a superpower. Être multilingue est un super pouvoir. C'est pour les gens francophones de l'Afrique, de la France, des autres parties du monde. J'ai de la chance de parler français et entrer au monde différent. Pour moi, c'est le monde de l'un de mes parents. Congo-Kinshasa, le pays d'origine de mon père. Une fête de laquelle je suis très fier. Il parle plusieurs langues et on sait le français. C'est pas sa première langue, mais tout à fait. C'est la langue officielle du Congo et donc pour la famille Shungu, c'est une langue importante. Quand j'étais jeune, j'ai parlé très peu de paroles. J'ai dû apprendre le français à l'école. Et alors, comme étudiant à l'université, je trouvais une très bonne opportunité. J'ai étudié à Paris pour 4 mois. Et puis j'ai parlé avec mon père en français pour la première fois. J'avais le sentiment que j'avais réussi au monde francophone. Maintenant, je fais partie. Un jour, je rêve d'ouvrir autre fenêtre et apprendre le lingala ou OTTL peut-être. Mais pour le moment, le français est mon moyen de montrer beaucoup de respect dans mon peuple congolais. Être multilingue est un super pouvoir.
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 So if you didn't understand the words of the first verse, if it even made you feel uncomfortable or nervous, step into the shoes of a newly arrived immigrant trying to learn English while people call them ignorant. Before you hate on someone for not speaking your language, go and learn Arabic, Japanese, French, Spanish, or another of the thousands of languages spoken on this earth. Your native language don't determine your worth. Learning a new language ain't easy, believe me, but the fruits of your labor are exceedingly sweet. See, practice makes you better. Don't worry if they laugh at you. In due time, you will open new avenues and travel to other countries if you have the opportunity. Immerse yourself and learn a language in a new community. Step outside your comfort zone and you might find you've made amazing new connections and expanded your mind. Être multilingue est un super pouvoir.
Être multilingue est un super pouvoir.
Être multilingue est un super pouvoir.
Être multilingue est ton 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 super pouvoir.
Jean-René Balekita, Peter Josué Shungu. JRB, Afro D, from the DRC. All the way to Champaign-Urbana. This is for the whole world. C'est pour tout le monde.
Welcome back. My first and favorite question to always ask is, what came first? Was it the music or was it the lyrics?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so in this particular song, the lyrics came first, actually. And so this was an idea that I had been thinking about for a while, just this idea of multilingualism being a superpower. And I previously taught ESL at Central High School in Champaign, and also just have many different lived experiences, both in terms of learning multiple languages myself and also in terms of being around people who speak multiple languages. So I deeply believe kind of that tenet that, you know, multilingualism is a superpower. And so I kind of was like, let me express this idea through a song. The three main languages I speak are English, French, and Spanish. And so I actually have 3 verses for that song, one in English, one in French, and one in Spanish. For now, the Spanish version is kind of on ice. I have that verse written, but in collaborating with Jean-René Balekita, I was like, you know what? Just making a version of this song with the English and French verses is going to be really powerful. So I had the lyrics, and actually what happened is that I teach music education at the University of Illinois. A colleague of mine, Mike Silvers, had this idea to put together a concert featuring Jean-René Balekita and his band, and then me and my band, Afro D and Global Soundwaves. So Jean-René and I got together and said, all right, if we're going to do this concert together, like, we need to collaborate as well. And I was like, you know what? I wrote this song. Why don't you listen to it and see if, like, maybe we could work on it together. I kind of rapped the lyrics, and he just started playing like this groove that you hear on the song, and I was like, that's perfect. And then he came up with the chorus, and then it was like, yeah, the music just fit the lyrics perfectly. So it kind of went from there.
So I'm assuming that Jean-René also speaks French, perhaps?
Yeah.
So that's where, because I was going to say.
Yep. Both Jean-René and myself, you know, have roots in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So Jean-René was born in DRC and then came here to the U.S. I was born here, but my father is from the Congo. For me personally, it was just really powerful to kind of connect with my own roots, you know. And so the verse that I rap in French on the song is kind of about my own connection with the French language and how that kind of is symbolic of my connection with my Congolese identity. And so collaborating with Jean-René was a perfect way to kind of bring that all together. He's an incredibly talented artist and also somebody who I think just fit the vibe of the song perfectly.
You had the first verse. The guitar part was at that point kind of improvised, kind of generated a theme, if you will. Mm-hmm. And then I'm just curious about the fleshing out of the rest of the parts, because I'm saying this definitely from a position of ignorance, so please forgive me, but I feel the beats that you're using and the rhythms behind it, I'm guessing, have a certain Congolese reference as well?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, you're not. Yep. That's not an ignorant question at all. And that was one of the things that was so beautiful about the creation of the song. It happened so organically. So like I said, initially, Jean-René and I got together to rehearse for this show. Jean-René just kind of was jamming on guitar and came up with that groove. So before the song was ever recorded or anything, we kind of just created it organically. You know, we didn't write down any music or anything like that. We just came up with it. Jean-René remembered his parts. You know, I had my verses memorized. and then we performed it at this show. That was really powerful. I mean, Jean René's band is great. So they did a set, and so he did, you know, kind of traditional Congolese music and some religious music, combination of music, and then my band came on and did like a, you know, a jazzy hip hop set. And then you know, we had this collaboration where Jean René and I did this song, you know, Superpouvoir or Superpower together. Yeah, in terms of the creation of the song, like things kind of went from there. And so Jean René, actually, I mean, he deserves a ton of credit on the song, because really all I contributed were the lyrics and the trumpet. Jean René was the one who recorded the guitar, he did the vocals, he did the piano, like the synthesizer part, he did the drums as well. And so Jean René feels Congolese rumba in his bones, you know, it's a part of his identity. And so he can just go into a DAW and program. So the drums he programmed himself, and the engineer who was there, Aidan McParland, he actually deserves a lot of credit as well, because he did, you know, the mixing and all of that. So Aidan just kind of let Jean René dive into the DAW and program the drums and everything.
Oh, hey, listener. I'm sure you weren't expecting me to interject right here, but I thought I'd do a quick voiceover to explain that the current version that you heard in this episode is a new version from when we originally recorded this episode. And it now includes a bass line that was performed by Javi Vasquez. Just wanted to make sure that the right person got the right credit. So back to the show.
It all came together. So I feel, you know, really, really fortunate that, you know, I had this idea, oh, it would be cool to collaborate with Jean René, but I didn't even know the extent to which it would take. Like, I didn't even know he was going to program in drums. I thought maybe this is just going to be a song that's kind of more laid back and just has this guitar groove. And then the drums took it up a notch, even, you know, made it even feel more hip hop. You know, it's a blend of hip hop and rumba. You know, drums are a key element of hip hop. So the fact he was able to do that made the groove just more solid.
You used the phrase rumba. You know, that doesn't have African roots, does it?
I believe that the rumba style kind of simultaneously evolved in, you know, multiple hemispheres, basically.
Sure.
So rumba is a style that's, you know, common to, you know, certain Latin American countries as well. But yeah, Congolese rumba kind of like is almost its own branch of that. You know, and I'm not an expert on, you know, kind of diving into this project also helped me learn more about Congolese music myself, because like growing up here, like I've never been an expert in that area. Not only do people in this country not know about the nuances between different styles of Congolese music, but a lot of times people in this country see Africa as like one, like, you know, kind of one place where everything is the same, you know. So the fact that Congo is just one of many, many countries in Africa, and then even within Congolese music, there are all these different styles. You know, rumba is more of a traditional style. Then there's also soukous, which is like kind of more of a dancing style. You know, there's more current styles beyond those that, you know, Congolese artists today are diving into. So as I said, I'm not an expert in that area, but I know more than a lot of folks around here do, and I learned more through this project as well.
I'm thinking about, there's this kind of homogenization of the continent of Africa, right?
It's like people in central Illinois don't want to be lumped in with Chicago, and yet they lump the entire continent of Africa together. So it's like there's definitely a problem with that.
Between rapping in English versus rapping in French, give me a little heads up on what would be like the challenges, because you know, you end up within the structure of the language, you tend to have the descriptor and then the subject,
right.
Rather than in English it's usually like the subject and then we describe it. Second follow-up question would be, which do you prefer, French or English, or maybe even Spanish? So like, if there's a preference.
To me, like hip hop especially is just like such a powerful tool for multilingualism, because I think like hip hop is all about the lyrics. Other styles of music, lyrics are important too, but so much is focused on like the melody. Whereas like with hip hop, really like, you know, the cadence, the delivery, that's important, but really like the lyrics to me are like at the essence of hip hop. And so for people who are multilingual and rap, like to me, it's like an incredible opportunity to just like, number one, like express yourself in different languages, and different languages can lend themselves to different forms of expression, and also find ways to express something, in one language that you might not be able to, you know, in another language, and also just connect with a larger audience. I think that's one thing. Like I have family who live in the Congo who, you know, some of them speak very little English, and like having this song where it's like they're, you know, they can hear Jean René sing and they can hear me rap in French. It's like, you know, I know that it's going to hit for them in a way that might not if they just heard a random track where I'm rapping entirely in English. The other thing is like really there's so many different kind of forms of bilingualism and multilingualism. So for me, like I was not a simultaneous like bilingual or multilingual person. Like I grew up speaking only English. And so I even talk about that in the song. You know, I spoke very little French, you know, when I was young. I learned it in school. And then when I studied in Paris, that's when I really became like proficient or, you know, virtually fluent. I would say that like I'm kind of on the verge of being fluent, but I definitely, you know, folks can tell that I'm not a native speaker. And Spanish is my third language. So with Spanish, like, you know, I learned that when I was 30 years old. So it was like I was already an adult, but then I lived in Mexico for a year and taught English down there. And then, you know, now my French and Spanish are both, I'd say, almost fluent. You know, I say I'm proficient in both, and also like have developed, even though I didn't grow up speaking those languages, had developed an accent that's at least like passable. You know, I think that's one thing that's challenging is it's like when you learn another language, a lot of people are so focused on vocabulary that they don't pay attention to the accent. They might know how to speak the language, but they sound like they're speaking English, but just using French words. And for me, like those things go hand in hand. If I'm going to learn a language, like I need to learn the accent as best as I can speak it at the same time that I'm learning the words. And that's really helped me to like speak both French and Spanish in a way where like I feel comfortable rapping in those languages on a track and knowing it's not going to be perfect, but knowing that like people who speak those languages are going to understand it and also respect it, that like this is someone who actually can speak these languages. So.
Right. There's a meta moment to me where, you know, the language is talking about the language of using another language, you know, and having a connection to a culture, a connection to family, a connection to community, you know, in much the same way. It's like we use music in that way to connect with other people that is across the language barrier. That somehow miraculously that reaches beyond just our usual sense of self and our own culture.
Yeah, I would just add, I see a lot of parallels. Like for me, kind of like the process of learning music and learning different aspects of music too. There's similarities between that and the process of learning language. As a musician and as a rapper, like I have so many different identities as well. You know, I play piano and that's like the instrument I primarily use to compose music. I play trumpet. On the musical side of things, the instrument I use primarily to perform. And then I rap and I do spoken word poetry. And so like kind of all those different elements of what I do are different ways I can interact with music. And then as you said, music is then a tool that can connect across cultures. And then with language, it's kind of similar. The process, you know, I had to put in a lot of work to learn those different instruments, just like I had to put in a lot of work to learn those different languages. I can think of specific instances where, you know, for example, when I went to the Congo for the first time, I was able to visit my family in Kinshasa. There were some musicians who were just playing in the park. Like I told you earlier, I bring my trumpet everywhere I go. And so I had my trumpet and just started jamming with these musicians. And so when I made this song with Jean-René Balakita, it kind of brought me back to that moment, you know, because it brought me back to that being in Kinshasa and just hearing his music and just diving in and collaborating. For me personally, like as someone who's, you know, essentially lived in the US my entire life, but my roots, you know, kind of extend beyond that. It's been really fulfilling to be able to connect with that aspect of my identity.
I was also thinking in much that same way, you know, things like food, music, languages, how some of those things within a culture also represent the influences of another culture. So again, me speaking from a position of ignorance is, you know, the only thing that I can think of in terms of Congolese people speaking French as a national language is because there was French influence and maybe even kind of a colonization. Possibly.
No, so it's complicated. I have another piece, like a spoken word poetry piece that I've written that's called Africa, where I talk about like just the African continent and you know, lifting up Africa as a diverse, rich place. And in one line, I say, car ironiquement, le fait que je parle français, une langue européenne, me rend plus proche au monde francophone en Afrique. So basically what I'm saying is like, ironically, the fact that I speak French which is a European language actually brings me closer to the French-speaking world in Africa. And so it's this big irony that, like, you know, I remember at the age of like 6 years old, you know, being awoken in the middle of the night and the phone was ringing. And so I'd pick up the phone and someone would be speaking in French on the other line, and they were calling from the Congo, and I had no idea what they were saying, but that was like a part of my reality. And so French within like the Congolese community is an important language, but it's also important to emphasize that it's not the native language for 99% of Congolese people, you know. And so my dad's native language is Otetela, his second language is Chiluba, and then French is his third language, and so English is his fourth language. So he you know, he truly is multilingual. And yeah, for many other people in the Congo, you know, it's the same way. So French is an important language, but it's not really the native language. It's not the language that most represents the people. So you know, so it's complicated. And that's something that I acknowledge in this particular piece. Superpouvoir is just like the importance of learning languages and the fact that there are so many languages in the world. And it's almost like being bilingual is like, that's powerful, but like people see being bilingual as the goal. People see like, oh, if you speak 2 languages, then you've like made it, right? And there are many people out there who speak 5, 6 languages. And so like, I think in this country, we have such a limited view. There are people who get mad because other people are speaking Spanish, or get mad because other people are speaking a language other than English. And it's like, if you're going to have that attitude and never learn another language yourself, then yeah, you're just ignorant.
And you're just missing out on being able to connect with other human beings.
Absolutely.
On the whole,
absolutely.
You know?
Yeah, it's like you're so focused on difference that you don't think you could possibly have anything in common with someone who has a different native language from you. When the reality is that some of the most powerful relationships and just connections that I've made in my life have been with people who speak a different native language other than English. But I put myself out there and lived in other countries, traveled to other places, and also put myself, you know, looking at Champaign specifically, there's a very large immigrant community from Guatemala. A lot of those folks actually speak Canjobal as their native language, which is an indigenous Guatemalan language. And so Spanish is their second language and English is their third language. So I was working with some of those students in school, and we would be speaking together in Spanish, and it was none of our first languages, but it was a language that we used to communicate as they were learning more and more English. And they even taught me a little bit of Canjobal as well. So, you know, I think really the world of language is just truly a fascinating one. And I think one where the more that we learn about other people around us and the more respect we have for the fact that, yeah, you know, people do speak other languages, and it doesn't make them less than because they happen to speak a different language than English. I think that can help us grow as a society and as a world.
I'm curious about your relationship with as a rapper, but also as a trumpeter,
trumpet player. Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
You know, you're using them both as separate voices. I mean, I'm sure maybe to convey different elements of thoughts, of ideas. I noticed, of course, when you have it in a recording context, you can record the trumpet part while your vocals are already there. I'm curious about that whole, like within a live context, how do you balance that, I guess, because I feel like there would be kind of a pull, and maybe it's song context, but how do you figure out how to express one over the other, or etc.? I mean, sorry, that was a weird question.
No, it's a really good question, though. And I think I call it like multiple musical identities. And teaching in music education is something that I talk about in my classes, you know, that like my students have multiple musical identities, some more so than others. You know, I have some students, they are a Western classical music oboe player, and that's what they do, and that's all they want to do. And you know, there's power in music regardless of kind of the genre and regardless of the instrument. But for me, and a lot of my students identify with this, is just this aspect of multiple musical identities, that we interact with music in different ways based on the context. And for me personally, like, yeah, I could not pick between rapping and playing trumpet. Both of those aspects of myself are central to who I am as a musician and even who I am as a person. And they kind of evolved separately, but over time they've become more and more intertwined. And I can definitely, you know, think of moments in my life. For example, the Eclectic Collective was a band you mentioned earlier that I played with in Boston, and they were incredibly talented, you know, and it was awesome playing with them. And I played trumpet with them. It was like a 10-piece band. It was kind of a mixture of like soul, rock, some hip hop influences, but not much hip hop. I loved it, but at a certain point, it's almost like I had to decide between being the trumpet player in Eclectic Collective as my sole identity as a person, or kind of like musically being both a rapper and a trumpet player and doing like carving my own path, plus still being an educator and being like a partner, you know, things of that nature. And for me, I've realized that like really my strength as a person is most realized when I'm not forced to put all my eggs in one basket, when I can be kind of like the plurality of identities that make up who I am. You know, I left that particular band and kind of focused on everything else. So that's when I started the Afro D All-Stars, which was basically my own live band in the Boston area. And so that group was often, sometimes as many as 10 people as well, had like flute and violin and other instruments in the context of basically a live hip hop band. And in that group, I would rap a verse and then I would play trumpet over the hook. And then I'd rap another verse, I'd play trumpet over the hook. And then we'd all take solos. And so there'd be a violin solo and a trumpet solo and a saxophone solo. And so there's definitely parallels between that band and then my current bands, Afro D and Global Soundwaves. When I formed Afro D and Global Soundwaves, that was kind of the model that I had in my mind. But I also love jazz. And I would say the Afro D All-Stars didn't really do much with jazz. We would have solos at the end, but it would kind of be just like a hip hop track. And then we would play solos at the end for the most part. And I feel like Afro D and Global Soundwaves really will just cover, you know, like a Roy Hargrove tune or a Kenny Garrett tune or like a Miles Davis tune and make that a part of our set. And then in addition, we play hip hop songs and we play songs that are a blend. I'm not a great singer myself, but I love collaborating with singers. And so in Afro D and Global Soundwaves, we have Jalen Hope, who's an incredibly talented singer. And so we're able to bring that soul element as well. So I feel like I'm a musician where, you know, I'm at my best where number one, I'm able to kind of pursue my own multiple musical identities. And number two, I'm able to be in an environment where I know like who else can complement that in really powerful ways. One example of that is the fact that I compose a lot of music on the piano or the keyboard. I'll come up with a groove on the keyboard. I'll be like, yeah, this is going to be a new song. And then I'll hand it off to our keyboard player because he can play it 10 times better than I can. So it's like, I can like play the groove and make it sound pretty good. But then in the context of a live performance, he can take it to the next level. And then I can focus on rapping and playing trumpet. So I think, you know, there really is just a power in the energy that comes when different people who are kind of all on the same page are creating music together and complementing one another in terms of, you know, stylistically and just really listening to one another as well.
I feel like we talked all about every other thing other than the song, but I'm going to get back to the song because
sounds good.
This is the time where I point out my favorite part of the song, and then I'm in turn going to ask you what your favorite part of the song is. But
sounds good.
This one was interesting because, of course, I'm going to do the English translation because it's the French part and nobody wants to hear that. There was a part that it really kind of hit home for me, and that's the line of, I studied in Paris for 4 months, and then I spoke French with my dad for the first time. As I get older, there's those moments within which you, and when I say you, I mean me, you make more and more connections as to an understanding about who your father is, who they are in relationship to you, who they are in the world, and either you get a chance to experience something that somehow connects you to them. You know, those moments to me, and I feel very fortunate that this continues to happen, is that I can connect to my dad through learning a little bit about them. It just happens, or I experience something that specifically helps me understand who they are as a person. And in turn, I learn a little bit about how I was kind of brought up and how I turned out because of that. It's this wonderful, like, cyclical thing that's self-reinforcing. Without too many words, it reminded me of those moments where you make a connection and you understand yourself and them at the same time. And I don't know if that was exactly your experience, but I thought it was really touching because it's just like you made that connection with your dad. And so for me, I thought it just... I don't know. I felt that is what I was saying.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I appreciate that because I think, my relationship with my father has kind of evolved over time. And I think like I've been fortunate that he's always been a part of my life. And so, you know, even though my parents were separated for a good part of my childhood, he was always really involved in my life. And at the same time, you know, he was primarily a provider. He wasn't, you know, someone who was super nurturing. And it didn't mean he was like cold or mean, but he was not someone where we had like super personal conversations or I felt like kind of that deep emotional connection. And I think over time, like I've come to grow closer to him in different ways. And I think that moment when I spoke French with him on the phone, you know, I still remember just being in like my host family's like apartment in Paris and talking with him on the phone, and just how like excited he was that I was just speaking with him and, you know, in French. That I think he's someone who is deeply proud of his own Congolese identity and didn't necessarily take a lot of active steps when I was a kid to make sure that I was growing up Congolese, so to speak. He would cook, you know, Congolese food, and there was some, you know, he would get together with other Congolese people sometimes, but there wasn't sort of this concerted effort. But I think like seeing how proud he was of being Congolese made me want to be that, and learning French was one aspect of that. At the time I studied in Paris, I had never been to the Congo, so I never made it to the Congo until I was an adult. For me, like that was almost the closest, you know, I had come at that point in my life to being in an environment, where even if culturally it was very different than the Congo, language-wise, there was at least this language that was also spoken in many parts of the Congo. And another thing I should mention about DRC is that it actually was not a French colony, it was a Belgian colony. In Belgium, they speak French as well.
Yes.
But so that's why the language there is French. There's a whole problematic history. The Belgians committed a lot of atrocities kind of in that process. June 30th is Congolese Independence Day. So that's like a day that like, you know, is important to me as well, you know, because it's like that's become a part of my identity, even if I've never, you know, I didn't grow up there, but it's still a part of who I am.
Now, in turn, what's your favorite part of the song?
I think I have two favorite parts. I think like in terms of my own lyrics, I think also in that first verse, you know, when I say, you know, the first few lines, and then I'm like, Congo Kinshasa, le pays d'origine de mon père. Like, I think that part, it just like hits because I kind of like lead up to it, like talking about how like, you know, talking about the importance of the French language, both in France and in Africa. And then when I say Congo Kinshasa, it's like, I feel it deeply because like, you know, you could go to an Afro D and Global Soundwaves show and not know that like, I'm Congolese. That's a part of my identity because like a lot of my music is hip hop. You know, I just like write a track about whatever and just spit it. And then I play some trumpet. So I think this piece, when I just like shout out, you know, Congo Kinshasa, it's powerful for me because it's like an affirmation of that aspect of my identity. And my last name, like people who know, like it's like if you know, you know. If you are from the Congo, then it's like chances are you know like what ethnic group Shungu comes from and everything. But outside of there, like people have no idea. Like I've had people think that my last name is Japanese because that's like the closest like reference they can come up with. Yeah, that particular line. But the other part I would say in terms of like the way the track came together is the chorus. When that first chorus hits and it's like et ton lang, et ton Superpouvoir, and the genre comes in with like the, you know, the harmonized vocals,
right,
and the trumpet line comes in. Like to me, it's almost like it's like we're kind of hiding some of the hidden gems in the song. Like, you know, you hear the trumpet a little bit at the beginning and on the verse, but then when that all comes together in the chorus, then it's like, okay, I see, you know, I see where this is going. That moment when Aiden kind of put it all together and then I heard like the complete track the first time, that moment I was just like, yeah, this is hitting.
I guess the part in the chorus that's kind of, it's this wonderful word painting too, right? Like, because not only is it just this one person saying that being multilingual is a superpower, but it's like this group of people, this community of people that are saying that all together in one language, you know, I don't know.
Yeah.
And hearing it as these multi voices and then more instrumentation kind of coming to the forefront, it's like this, what if I said like it's a charge, like, you know, just like an army charging forward, it just feels like, well, as a chorus should be, right? Like it should be this big thing.
Yeah, I think it was important that, you know, both Jean René and myself are multilingual. Like I feel like that's something that I think sometimes gets lost, like not only in hip hop but in a lot of styles of music. It's like for me personally, like if I'm gonna rap something, like number one, like I wrote it, you know, I'm not gonna write, you know, like I was involved in this project many years ago that was like Shakespeare hip hop for kids. And they like gave me these like, you know, and it was a cool concept. Like, I'm not going to knock the concept, but they gave me these like kind of corny like rhymes and they're like, just rap this. And like, I did it and they paid me a little bit of money. And like, you know, the company, like I think has done pretty well and everything, but it just didn't feel like authentic. And I was like, you know what, like, you know, for me, like if I rap something, like it needs to feel authentic. I either need to be spitting something that's true to my life or telling a story to try to like, you know, lift up other people whose voices I think need to be heard. And so I think with this particular piece, the fact that the people who are involved are multilingual was important to sort of hit home this message.
My last question is, why did you pick this song to be the song you talked about today?
Yeah, I mean, so two reasons. So number one, the real reason is that like it's such a foundational piece in terms of me like sort of embracing my identity as a person and embracing like my multilingualism, using that as a model to like kind of help other, you know, I think there are a ton of people out there who speak more than one language and have been conditioned to view that as a deficit. Grown up in another country, came to this country. My dad came to this country when he was 16 years old. So whenever like I see somebody who's like an immigrant and maybe came to this country, like, you know, when they were old enough that it's harder to learn English, but like still young enough that like sort of, you know, US identity, you know, kind of the US culture, like has a big influence on them. Like I think that can sometimes be the hardest, you know, because if you come here when you're really little, then it's like, you know, you can sometimes assimilate, for better or worse, assimilate more to US culture. And, you know, when you come here as an adult, it's like you're more kind of strongly rooted in generally the identity that you came from. But I think that piece of it, you know, I think for me, it was like a way to say like, you know, I see you. You know, like people out there, you know, my own students that I've worked with who, you know, especially when I taught high school, you know, basically were ostracized, were kind of like had their own community, and then like were not welcomed into the mainstream kind of culture of the school. Like I see you, and the fact that you speak multiple languages, like that's something to be proud of. So I think that's the first reason, you know. Hand in hand with that, also collaborating with Jean-René Balakita, like it was just the perfect timing. Like you contacted me about the podcast, and Mike Silvers contacted me about doing a show with him, and I was like, you know what, let's combine all this. Let's record this track that we just started working on. I think the other reason that I chose this track is more just logistical. Like I've been in Champaign-Urbana since 2017, and I have 4 kids, and so my life when I lived in Boston pre-kids was very different. Like I put out 2 albums when I lived in Boston, 2 solo out. Well, technically 1 solo album, 1 album with Afro D, All Stars. I put out 2 albums with Soul Movement. I put out 2 albums with the Eclectic Collective. So I was putting out music. Since I've moved to Champaign-Urbana in 2017, I've put out 0 albums. Like nothing's out there other than videos on YouTube. And it's a function of just like my reality as a person. Like, you know, I taught high school, which is all encompassing. Now I teach music education at the University of Illinois, which is all encompassing. When I'm not in my office or teaching classes there, I'm doing work with young people. You know, I do songwriting projects that are kind of like, you know, part of my work, my larger mission at the university to really just collaborate with the community. But that takes up a lot of time. And then I have 4 kids. The oldest is actually a student at the University of Illinois. So Paula is actually originally from Mexico herself, and then came to live with us, you know, several years ago. And yeah, now is studying at the U of I. And then we have 3 younger kids. So Malia is 10, Naima is 7, and Isaac is 2. And so it's like between that and then my, you know, kind of professional work at the university, I have just enough time to kind of like have a band, rehearse on occasion, and play some shows, you know, and that's all I can fit into my schedule. If other people ask me to join their band, I'm like, don't have time, you know. If someone's like, oh, let's try and record, I'm like, you know what, like, I don't know if I can make it work. And so this was like kind of motivation. I'm like, you know what, I haven't put anything out there in a long time. This track is a good opportunity. So, you know, I have a song that I've written called Balancing Act, and I feel like that sums up my life in a lot of ways. Like I'm never bored because there's always things that I'm trying to balance in my life, and it's a blessing. I love all the things that I'm doing. Like I'm really fortunate that I have a day job that's focused on music, but it's not being a musician. It's a perfect balance because I can still see being a musician as something I do because I love, but I can also have a day job that focuses on music, which is my passion, you know, and kind of combines music and education, which is also a big passion of mine. And for me personally, I also have taken a very untraditional route. My education and music paths were separate and kind of merged over time. Like I got an undergrad degree in international relations, you know, which is very much tied to this multilingual idea. I got my master's to teach high school history, and it wasn't even even like a music teacher at that stage in my life, but kind of just evolved. And actually working with ESL students was really when my role became more music related, because I would support those students in music classes and would kind of see that like, you know, they're facing barriers not only of language, but also of like kind of how do we teach music? You know, if we teach music only by reading notes on a page, we might have amazing musicians who come from another culture where they learn by ear, who are also kind of shut out of the process. I see, you know, an opportunity to kind of combine my educational backgrounds and my musical backgrounds, you know, both through my professional work, but also through the music that I make.
Champagne is Also a Band podcast is proud to support Exile on Main Street. Exile on Main Street, located in the old train station building at 100 North Chestnut Street in downtown Champaign, has been helping to build record collections since 2004. Carrying a wide array of new and used LPs, CDs, and video games. Exile on Main Street has something for just about any music enthusiast and old school gaming devotee. Exile also hosts regular free live music shows on its stage, so be sure to check out their Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter pages for the up-to-date details on the next upcoming event. Open 7 days a week, they can be reached by phone at 217-398-MAIN. That's 217-398-6246. Welcome back. So, Pete, what is your favorite Champaign-Urbana venue, past or present?
So, as I mentioned earlier, I've only been out here for 7 years, but I have both a favorite past venue and I have to say a tie for favorite current venue, but my favorite past venue is the Iron Post. So the Iron Post is a venue that was the first venue that I performed at in Champaign-Urbana. When I moved out here, I got a haircut, one of the barbershops on North First Street, and the barber there was like, you got to check out this spot. They have this event called Soul on Sunday. And I was like, okay, so like, I'll go check it out. It's like, it's at the Iron Post. So I checked it out, and that was kind of like the moment where everything started to happen musically for me in Champaign-Urbana. So I went to Soul on Sunday. It's a monthly open mic that's still going on. They have singers, they have poets, they have a live band. And my friend Aaron A. Plus Wilson is the one who runs it, who hosts the event. And so I went to it, got up on the mic, and I think I shared a poem or spit a rap or something. And then I think also played trumpet, you know? Yeah. And people were like, oh, that was cool. And like, I was like, you know, I loved the vibe there. It was just a positive vibe. I loved the venue itself. Like Iron Post was just a really cool venue. And I loved the fact that it was like 7 p.m. So it was like back when I lived in Boston, like most events would start at like 9:30. On paper, they would start at 9, but it would actually start at like 10:30 or something like that. And that just wasn't my reality anymore. I really was excited about the fact that I feel like Champaign-Urbana has a music scene where like if you want to kind of be involved in things that are during hours that aren't the middle of the night, you can find that. Like there's, you know, the Canopy Club still has those late night shows and everything. But for me personally, like Iron Post was like a good vibe, and Soul on Sunday especially. Then when Paul passed away, the owner of Iron Post, and Iron Post shut down, Rose Bowl became my venue of choice. So I've done a lot of shows over at the Rose Bowl in Urbana, and that's been a great venue. I said kind of a tie now because there's a new venue, Gallery Art Bar, that is in Urbana as well, and I've done a lot of events over there lately. They had a whole Black History Month series of events that I hosted, and we've come up with this name, Certified Organic, which basically is this name for this series of events that bring together musicians, often musicians who haven't played together before, and we just jam and kind of like in like a soulful vibe. So it's not an explicitly Black event, but it is an event that kind of like brings to the forefront Black music, and a lot of times at least some of the musicians performing are Black musicians. So we had that Black History Month event. We had a Women's History Month event that was entirely Black female featured artists, which was really powerful as well. So Gallery's really been intentional about like being a space that's open to a diverse range of folks. And also like, I think one thing I appreciate about the scene here, I mean, there's fewer venues than when I lived in Boston or New York. Sure. You know, clearly my favorite venues, I should say, are the ones that are open to a wide variety of styles of music. In part because my music does kind of cross genres. Just as my music doesn't fit in like a venue that plays primarily country music. Like, yeah, I haven't done any of those bars in, you know, random towns in Illinois because like I don't know how it would be received, and maybe people would love it, but like, yeah, that doesn't feel like my scene. But at the same time, venues that do kind of like explicitly hip hop and DJs and late night shows, like that's also not really my scene at this point in my life. So I'm kind of like in between, and the fact that a space like Gallery Art Bar kind of does both and everything in between, like I'm grateful for that, you know, and I feel like Rose Bowl does that to a certain extent as well. And so that's not to knock like, you know, the hip hop scene by any means, because like, you know, there's some amazing hip hop artists, you know, in Champaign-Urbana. You know, you had Simba P on the show, Jarrell Young. My band's going to be doing a show with Trouble Chasing in July downtown Champaign. And so that's July 19th. So that's, you know, so there's definitely some good synergy in terms of the hip hop scene itself. But I also recognize that like what I do is not like exclusively hip hop. And so like sometimes it can be harder to find a home for what I do. And so the fact that venues like the Rose Bowl and Gallery Art Bar provide a space where I really feel comfortable bringing my full self into those venues, I appreciate that. I really want to create spaces where different people who may not always interact with each other are able to interact around this common thread of music that kind of speaks to folks. And so, as I said earlier, that's not like the goal. Like, I also just love making music and love, you know, but like as an offshoot of that, like I really want to be intentional about playing shows that are open to as wide an audience as possible instead of being exclusive to certain audiences.
I'm kind of curious, what do you think makes a good music community?
I think first and foremost is a community where like youth are front and center, where like young people matter and young people have a say in what that community looks like. Young people have opportunities to interact with music, to hear music. And there are some really positive examples of that in Champaign-Urbana. So the ISYM Hip Hop Camp, and Simba P's been an instructor there. I'm one of the co-directors of the camp. So this year, this summer, myself, Lamont Holden, who's also a professor at the U of I, aka Letter L Beats, and then Adam Cruz, who's also a professor at the U of I. The three of us are running the camp, and then we have a whole bunch of, you know, MCs and DJs and producers and, you know, teachers and volunteers who are coming together to help run the camp. And it's been around for several years. And in the course of a week, young people have the opportunity to write rhymes, make beats, put out a mixtape, and then perform a show at the end of the week. To me, that is as important as like anything that can happen in the Champaign-Urbana music scene. Like, you know, there are big name artists that come to Champaign-Urbana, and that's like amazing too. And, you know, there are awesome shows that are going on. But the fact that we have like a hip hop camp every year that brings a lot of the campers that come are from Champaign-Urbana as well. And we provide scholarship money to help make it possible for them to attend. And so ISYM is a larger camp. And so there's like, you know, bands, there's wind ensemble, and there's orchestra, and there's rock camp, and there's so many different camps going on. But the hip hop camp specifically intentionally has been a camp that has sought to be, you know, racially diverse, socioeconomically diverse, and also gender diversity. We've been successful at having female instructors and non-binary instructors and, you know, campers as well. It's not, you know, sometimes hip hop is a genre where like people create spaces that kind of shut out women or, you know, just people who aren't men. And so that I think is an important aspect of a music community, is like empowering youth. Another example of that is actually Girls Rock is a camp, you know, that happens every summer. My daughter Malia got to be a part of the camp last year, and she's actually going to be able to do it again this year. And Girls Rock, yeah, it's kind of that same model where it's over the course of a week, you make music, you get together with other girls and you form a band. And the fact that a lot of musicians and rappers in our community are a part of those initiatives like speaks volumes to like the overall scene, you know. And so I think that's critical. In addition to that, I think it's important to have a scene where people really have a spirit of collaboration and not competition. And I think that's really tough. Like, you know, venues, they got to make money. They got to like make sure they're getting the best shows and the other venues are not getting that artist that they want to book. They got to make sure that, you know, artists are not booking shows in back-to-back weeks at two venues that are next to each other. You know, they have all these kind of like criteria, and artists themselves, like they want to get known. They want to be, you know, the best at what they do. But for me personally, like, and it's interesting because I love sports and I love music, but I think one of the reasons that I chose music over sports in my own life, not only because like it's harder and harder to like, you know, kind of do a lot with sports as you get older, but also because like I am just more of a collaborative person. Like I don't see my my motivation is not through competition. Like, I want to be a good MC, but like my primary motivation as an MC is not to be able to say that I'm better than everyone else out there. My primary motivation is just to make dope music that speaks to myself and speaks to a wider audience and can even uplift, the community. That's kind of my goal. And so I think that unfortunately, in Champaign-Urbana, as in every community, there are people who are focused solely on making money or focused solely on like, what do they get out of it? And I think that can harm the scene as a whole, and fortunately, like, I feel like there are a lot of people out there who are like seeing the bigger picture and saying like, how can we create opportunities in Champaign-Urbana that are going to benefit everyone, rather than how can I get my shine at the expense of everyone else around me. And finally, I think like a good aspect of a scene is really like being intentional about making space for a variety of music, not just the music that you like. So, a lot of clubs traditionally have been rock clubs, and it's like, as soon as they hear hip hop, they don't want to book it because like they have a certain image of what that means. I've dealt with that like my entire, my entire career as a musician. Is like, there's certain venues that I know are not really open to me. And yet, ironically, sometimes when I have gotten in at those venues, then they're like, oh yeah, that was great. It's like, yeah, I think like a scene that's open to a wide variety of styles of music is really important also. One thing I'll say about the Champaign-Urbana scene is that I think that there are so many mini scenes in Champaign-Urbana. There's so much going on musically, and yet if you talk to a given person, like, they will say like, Champaign-Urbana is a rock town, or Champaign-Urbana only does folk music, or Champaign-Urbana is this, and and it's like they know one sliver of the scene but yet speak on it as if they're the authority on the entire scene. And there's so much hidden, not even hidden, but just like music that's out there that people are not paying attention to, and then they like act as if it doesn't exist. And so I think like a scene where people are aware of like other stuff that's going, and we're all gonna, like, I'm not an expert on the rock scene in Champaign-Urbana because that's not like the music I primarily listen to, but I'm at least aware of it and at least like acknowledge that it's important to the overall scene. And I don't feel that that's always reciprocated in terms of like folks, who, and to be honest, there's a racial aspect to it as well, that like, a lot of the white music is sometimes mainstream, and a lot of music associated with black folk or people of color is sometimes marginalized.
After the interview, Pete reached out to me and wanted me to include a tribute to somebody whom he thought embodied what building a good music community was about. And so I'm just going to let him use his words to explain a person that he really cares about deeply, and we are sad to have lost.
When I think about the Champaign-Urbana music scene, and particularly when it comes to hip hop, someone who I really need to mention is Dr. P, William Patterson. He's somebody who did so much for this scene. He tragically passed away this past spring, but he was a professor at the U of I, and he was also someone who grew up in Urbana and someone who was deeply rooted in expanding opportunities for young people in the Champaign-Urbana communities and beyond. His Ghetto Genius programming did so much for youth in this area. He collaborated with a lot of other organizations. He was one of the engineers, the pioneers of this hip-hop double Dutch boom bus, which basically is this bus that goes around the community, and young people can get on this bus and they can record music, they can make beats, they can rap. So it's this idea of kind of this mobile sound studio, which is a really innovative idea. So I think when I think about a music scene overall, to me it goes beyond just venues where people play music, and it goes into what's happening in the community. So Dr. P is really an inspiration to me in terms of continuing that work moving forward.
Champaign is also a band podcast is proud to support Jubilee Cafe. Jubilee Cafe is a free weekly meal program at Community United Church of Christ, 805 South 6th Street in Champaign, Illinois. Jubilee Cafe serves a home-cooked meal from 5 to 6:30 each Monday. Their mission is to feed hungry people by cooking healthy, delicious meals and by serving their guests restaurant-style with servers waiting on tables. Jubilee Cafe is open to anyone who cares to eat with them. Because food insecurity among students is so high, they serve students as well as others in and around the Champaign-Urbana community who struggle with hunger. Meals are free to all and will be served each Monday evening, located in the accessible lower level of the building at 6th and Daniel Streets in Champaign. For more information on the meal or how to volunteer, Go to the Jubilee Cafe CUCC Facebook page or email them at jubilee.cafe@community-ucc.org. That's jubilee.cafe@community-ucc.org. Welcome back. So, of course, Pete, what is your favorite non-musical thing or things?
So, this might be a little cheesy, but I gotta say my family. Like, I gotta, and that's like, just from the heart. I've changed as a person, like, when I became a father. And I realized that, like, as much as I love music and as much as I love teaching and just like love, opportunities to connect with people, travel, like all of that, those are things that are central to who I am. But, really, like, there's nothing more important to me than family. My kids are what, just like motivate me and inspire me. Yeah, I love spending time with my kids. I'm like the father who's always coming up with like creative games to play with my kids. Like, we'll make music together. Like last night, went out in the backyard and I put on some beats that I made years ago. And my 7-year-old Naima was rapping over the beats, and my 2-year-old Isaac was like, he has his little drum set and he was trying to like play drums along to the beat. And like that is what I live for. Like, that like opportunities to like really just be present with family, like put the phone to the side and stop scrolling on social media and just be present with my kids and with my wife Melissa. Like, she inspires me as well, and she's an educator. She teaches first grade at Kenwood Elementary School in Champaign. I think we just complement each other really well. Like, we have different personalities, but our values are very similar. Outside of music, folks who know me will say the same thing. Like, a lot of times, like, folks are like, oh, can you come out to the show I'm playing over at Rose Bowl tonight? And I'm like, I'm on daddy duty, like that's my priority right now. Like, I'm looking after my kids, and that's what I want to be doing, to be honest. I'm at a point in my life where I'm constantly tired. I'm not getting enough sleep at night. Most nights, like, one of my kids is waking up and waking me up at some point in the night. That's just my reality. It's what I signed up for. I wouldn't have it any other way. And I'm immensely proud of my kids. It's beautiful to see them like getting involved in music in their own ways and just like finding their own path. That's my favorite, it's people, so I kind of cheated, but that's my favorite non-musical thing is my family.
I mean, I really have no follow-up questions. However, I do have a suggestion. You should see a new game should be like, I'm going to teach you all to be studio engineers, and then you can record my album. So you should do that.
No, it's funny. Like Isaac, because I'm not a drummer. Like, I mean, I love rhythm and I can keep beat. I even played bass drum in like a drill team, like a step squad when I was like in college. But like, as far as drum set, like, I just don't, I've never learned it and never like really just taken the time to do it. So Isaac, he's 2 and he can already play drums better than I can. Like, he can keep a beat. He's doing different things with the right hand and the left hand. And like, so I'm kind of like, you know what? Like, down the road, he's going to be playing drums in my band, or at least playing drums on a track that like, I'm recording or something. So it wasn't even on my, like, any of my kids being a drummer wasn't even on my radar. But it just like, we would play shows and he would just stare at the drummer. He would just like look at the drummer the entire time. And you could tell like the gears were spinning. I mean, that's one of the coolest things about having kids, is just like seeing the directions that they, that they're pulled, and the things that speak to them, and like encouraging that, and just like, and also when it happens to be something that like I'm also passionate about, it's just like, that's really cool. Like, I can see where this can go in the future and how we can collaborate and everything.
I mean, bless you for hopefully bringing another drummer into the scene. We just need more drummers.
Right. Yeah, it's so funny how like I tell people, oh, Isaac loves drums, and they're like, oh, I'm sorry, like, you're never gonna get any sleep. I'm like, number one, I don't get any sleep anyway because my kids always wake up at night, and number two, like, I welcome it. Like, if he feels called to play drums, like that, to me, that's awesome. Like, I don't mind the noise. I don't mind, and I also think like being someone who's been in music for such a long time, every instrument has their stereotypes. People think like, oh, drummers are like this, trumpet players are like this. Like, I don't think I fit the stereotype of trumpet players that most people have in their head, whatever it is. But regardless, like, to me, like, a lot of people play more than one instrument. A lot of people aren't, and so I think like we love to compartmentalize people, based on different identities. And yeah, if Isaac, becomes a drummer, awesome. If he switches to another instrument, awesome. If he goes in another direction, like that's cool too. But for now, like he's all in on drums and I'm all in on that too. Like I got no hang-ups about that. So, but I will say I got to give a shout out to Mitchell Killo. He's the bass player who's been like the rock of the music scene for me since I've been out here. Like we met, I think, at Soul on Sundays. We both played together in Nuclei, the reggae soul band that used to play in. And then when I started Afro D and Global Soundwaves, he was the first person who I was like, if I start this group, like, you down to play bass? And he was like, yup. And I was like, all right, we're good. So he's been the person who's like, pretty much never missed a gig and just like holds things down for the group. It's been a blessing to play with him and also the other folks in the band. Lawrence Parks is our saxophone player, who's just incredibly talented sax player and just like incredibly hard worker too. Like even just in the time I played with him, he's just like grown by leaps and bounds. And I mentioned Jalen Hope earlier, who's an amazing singer. And then Brighton Sears, that keys player I mentioned earlier, who like sometimes I'll come up with a keys groove and pass it on to him, and then he just makes it sound like beautiful, and I'm like, all right, yep, that's what I'm looking for. And then we're in the process. We mentioned drummers earlier. Travis Brown is our new drummer, so he's gonna be debuting with us actually tonight, which is not going to be tonight when this comes out, but he's debuting with us
at the Toast of Taylor Street.
Yeah, exactly. It is hard to find like a group of musicians who are all on the same page and who kind of like have the same vision, or at least are willing to like compromise to like, make things work. So
Pete, thank you for being on the show and telling me about your song Superpouvoir.
Superpouvoir. Yep, exactly. Yeah. I love, all good.
And talking about your experiences in the scene and your favorite non-musical thing. And thank you for making the trip all the way out here. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Absolutely, Sven. I appreciate the opportunity. And it's been good to talk with you. Thank you for listening to Champagne is Also a Band podcast. This is Pete Afro D Shungu reminding you, great music is out there. Go find it where you live.
That's a wrap.
Champagne is also a band.
You almost have an NPR voice. It's so good.
Studio South Peter on the inside.
Number one, I don't get any sleep anyway.